Why do some groups in society feel excluded or unheard? How do difference and diversity sometimes lead to marginalization? Let's understand this important educational and social issue in a simple way. Question may ask like, what do you mean by marginalization and educational marginalization? What are the causes of educational marginalization? How can it be overcome? Discuss the role of poverty in marginalization. How poverty is related to marginalization. Marginalization. Marginalization is a process whereby something or someone is pushed to the edge of a group and accorded lesser importance. This is predominantly a social phenomenon by which a minority or subgroup is excluded, and their needs or desires ignored. It is a social process of becoming or being made marginal. A society that labels certain people as outside the norm, hateful or useless, marginalizes those people, edging them out. People who are poor, disabled, elderly or who in other ways are seen as not quite fitting may belong to such people. Marginalization comprises those processes by which individuals and groups are ignored or relegated to the sidelines of political debate, social negotiation and economic bargaining. Homelessness, age, language, employment status, skill, race and religion are some criteria historically used to marginalize. Educational marginalization. Education for all, EFA, cannot be achieved without overcoming marginalization. The Education for All Global Monitoring Report 2010, Reaching the Marginalized, however, defines marginalization as a form of acute and persistent disadvantage rooted in underlying social inequalities. Example, girls and women, hard-to-reach groups, ethnic minorities, poor households, people living in informal settlements, individuals with disabilities, rural populations, nomadic population, those affected by armed conflicts and HIV and AIDS, and street and working children. Reaching marginalized children, youth and adults required political commitments backed by practical strategies and politics for inclusive education. Measuring and understanding marginalization is an important first step to overcoming. Household surveys and other data provide insights into the relationship between poverty, health, ethnicity, parental literacy, and education. Develop data collection system to identify marginalized groups and areas characterized by high levels of deprivation and monitor their progress. Identify the drivers of marginalization in specific groups. To help government and development partners chart the dimensions of marginalization, identify patterns of individual and group disadvantage and therefore inform policy design and public debate. The achievement deficit is widely spread across individuals and groups facing broader educational disadvantages, predominantly in the poorest countries, but also in richer countries. Marginalized individuals and groups do not just accumulate fewer years of education. They often receive a poor quality education that results in low levels of learning achievement. Evidence from schemes to measure learning shows that factors such as household wealth, parental education and home language exercise influence on learning achievement. Causes of educational marginalization. Household poverty. It is one of the strongest and most persistent factor contributing to educational marginalization, and hence it is a formidable barrier to education for all. The effects of poverty are strongly conditioned by social attitudes. Poorest households cannot ensure their children continue to receive schooling when faced with external shocks such as droughts, floods or economic downturns. Child labor. 166 million children ages 5 to 14 years engaged in labor in 2004. Child labor remains a barrier to education. The group-based identities such as race, language, culture or ethnicity are also among the deepest fault lines in education, and are often reflected in human geography. Disability. Disability remains one of the least visible but most potent factor in educational marginalization. People in slums. People living in slums, remote, rural areas or conflict-affected zones are typically among the poorest and most vulnerable in the society and are undeserved in education. HIV and AIDS. HIV and AIDS also have a wide-ranging impact on education. Also, these different groups face distinct challenges, the shared discrimination and stigmatization which limit their educational opportunities. Overcoming educational marginalization. Accessibility and affordability. First of all, make education affordable. In many countries, government has abolished formal school fees, but indirectly formal charges continue. It is to keep the school out of reach for millions of children. Private supplementary tutoring affect affordability. First step towards improving affordability would be to eliminate all school fees. Incentives covering other costs linked to school attendance can play a vital role in enabling marginalized children to participate in school. Learning environment. Learning environment matters. Typically, those who enter school carrying the weight of disadvantage receive the worst education. They are often taught by poorly trained teachers, sometimes in a language they do not understand. Textbooks are frequently unavailable or include material that depicts negative stereotypes. Governments can address these problems by creating learning environment beginning with providing incentives for skilled teachers to work in marginalized areas. Ensuring that teachers and schools are equipped to support children with disabilities is equally important. Ability grouping should be avoided as it seldom helps the marginalized. Entitlements and opportunities, laws, norms and rules play a role in empowering marginalized people, overcoming discrimination and realizing the right to education. National legislation can prohibit formal discrimination and create an environment that enables greater equity. Laws are most effective when linked to social and political mobilization on the part of marginalized people. Role of poverty in marginalization. Poverty is the condition of not having access to material resources, income or wealth. In USA, poverty has been defined using the poverty line. Poverty can be absolute poverty or relative poverty. Absolute poverty is the level of poverty where individuals and families cannot meet food, shelter, warmth and safety needs. Relative poverty refers to economic disadvantage compared to wealthier members of the society. Poverty may correspond not only to lack of resources, but to the lack of opportunity to improve one's standard of living and acquire resources. Poverty has many dimensions and manifestations. It always means reduced access to material, economic, social, political or cultural resources needed to satisfy basic needs. A primary effect of marginalization is poverty. Historically, society has blamed people who are marginalized in placing fault within the characteristics of the individual or more broadly to entire groups who are marginalized. This leads to blaming the victim for his or her situation, attributing it to specific characteristics and that often make the victims often feel isolated and rejected from those around them. Marginalization is a shifting phenomenon linked to social status. There are many ways individuals and groups are become marginalized. For example, someone can be born into excluded groups or they might enter a group due to social or economic changes. A group or individual who is marginalized has little control over the situation. Marginalization can come at any time and at any place during one's life through a social or economic change. People can become marginalized into the upper class of their economy, or even on the downgrade into poverty. It all depends on what dramatic change occur in the economy. People in poverty are marginalized. Poverty is hard to define and even harder to measure. Nations are probably less inclined to measure poverty than development. Every country in the world has people in poverty. Poverty is the main cause of marginalization. Poverty is also measures in terms of the gap between different standards of living. It is referred as relative poverty. Poverty and underdevelopment are the correlates of marginalization. Causes of poverty: agricultural cycles and natural disasters. Natural disasters such as droughts, flooding and earthquakes and the agricultural cycles have devastated communities throughout the world. Developing countries often suffer much more extensive and acute crises at the hands of natural disasters. Corruption and social inequality. Corruption often accompanies centralization of power, when leaders are not accountable to those they serve. Most directly, corruption inhibits development when leaders help themselves with money that would otherwise be used for development projects. There is another source of poverty, throughout the world's social inequality that stems from cultural ideas about the relative worth of different genders, race, ethnic groups and social classes. Illiteracy and world-spread diseases. In least developed countries there is a high level of illiteracy. This is a very big problem in improving the livelihood of people. The poor, who are also illiterate, have a limited chance of making use of improved production technologies and preventive health services. That is why diseases such as HIV malaria exacerbated the already precarious conditions of the poor. Disease increase expenditure on health, at the same time reduces effective working time. Effects of poverty. The effects of poverty can be felt at every level of society, from the individual living in poverty to the political leader attempting to provide solutions. Whether it is health conditions or increased crime rates, poverty reaches just about every aspect of life. To understand the severity of the problem which leads to marginalization, let us study the following effects of poverty. Malnutrition. The most common effect of poverty is malnutrition. This is especially seen in children of poor families. People living in poverty rarely have access to highly nutritious food. Even if they have access to these foods, it is unlikely that they are able to purchase them. The healthiest foods are usually the most expensive, therefore, a family on a very small budget is much more likely to purchase food that is less nutritious, simple because that is all they can afford. Health. one of the severe effects of poverty is the health effects that are always present. This includes things from diseases to life expectancy to medicine. Diseases are very common in people living in poverty because they lack the resources to maintain a healthy living environment. They are almost always lacking in nutritious foods, which decrease their body's ability to fight off diseases. Education. Education is largely affected by poverty. Many people living in poverty are unable to afford the necessary clothing or school supplies. Others may not have a way for their children to get to school. There is a clear correlation between families living in poverty and their lack of education. Without the ability to attend school, many people go through life illiterate. Poverty prevents people from gaining good education, and not obtaining an education prevents people from escaping poverty. Economy. Among the effects of poverty includes its impact on the economy of the country. Mainly, the number of people living in poverty influences employment rates heavily. Without an education, people are unlikely to find a paying job. Unemployment hinders a country from developing into a strong economic system. A high unemployment rate can impede a country from progressing in all aspects. Society. Poverty also has social effects. Many people living in poverty are homeless, which puts them on the streets. There also seems to be a connection between poverty and crime. When people are unemployed and homeless, social unrest may take over and lead to increase in crime. When people have nothing and no money to buy necessities, they may be forced to turn to theft in order to survive. Homelessness and high crime rates impact countries' people and can create many problems in a society. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share for more videos.